Okay, back on metaphor again. Most of the stuff that I think about in terms of metaphor is metaphorical. The content of language is metaphorical. And what I've spoken about before, and what I spend a lot of time thinking about, it seems, is about how, well, it's ideas that come out of cognitive linguistics and that whole flotilla of ideas around that the structure of thought, certainly 90% of thought at least, is metaphorical. But as I say, what I mostly tend to dwell on with that is the actual content of the words. You know, why we use container words to mean categories, or why we use journey words to mean life changes, or why we use substance words to mean entities like knowledge, that kind of thing. But what I've been thinking about just now is about to the extent to which other parts of speech, really, utterances, act metaphorically. I mean, I know other things do as well. I know things like gesture do, I know things like images do. But I'm thinking specifically about other aspects of language. And it seems to me there's a couple of ways into that. And I should say I'm entering this prior to doing the research, but I guess that's what these videos are for, really. And it seems to me there's a couple of bits of that. I mean, one is to do with something like sentence length. And I think I read somewhere that the average length of a traditional poem, I don't mean, I'm specifically talking about traditional poems. The average length of a traditional poem is about 3 seconds long. It takes about 3 seconds to speak. Or a particular kind of traditional poem, actually, it should be more specific. And that's about the same length of time as a certain kind of breathing pattern. So it's picking up on a breathing pattern. So the metaphorical content of some sentence lengths, particular sentence lengths you find in rhythm, in the rhythms found in poem sentence length, has a kind of metaphorical shadowing of fairly peaceful, even breathing. So within the rhythms of some poems, there is this sense of, it is metaphorically alluding to a sense of security, to a sense of calmness and peace, when you're in a situation in which your breathing is not ragged, it's not hasty, you're not adrenaline fueled, you're not running, you've not just been running, you're not aroused in any way. So maybe there's something about the length of poems which is metaphorically alluding to a certain kind of state of being. But the one I've been thinking, that wasn't what I was going to talk about actually. The one I've been thinking about specifically is to do with what I think is referred to as intonation contour. Intonation contour is the shape that a sentence makes in terms of its the pitch of the intonation as it moves through the sentence. So some sentences have a falling intonation when it goes down. Other sentences have a rising intonation when it goes up, and others, kind of do this thing, up and down. And the reason why this has come to my attention is that some of my students, quite a lot of my students actually, have got this pattern which I don't remember having when I was a student. Maybe I did, but it's a speech pattern which has got a rising intonation, so the intonation contour goes up at the end. So they'll be speaking, and all their sentences end in a rising note at the end. So they're talking, and the voice goes up, and everything sounds like a question. And it's very noticeable, actually. And clearly they're not actually asking questions. I always kind of think they're asking questions, or I used to at least. But they're not asking questions. It's like there's an unspoken at the end of every question. Or pardon, as if they're soliciting something at the end of every sentence. Sometimes I find it really irritating, I have to say. Other times I'm just kind of engaged by it. But increasingly I don't even notice it, which is doubly interesting in a way, because it means it's kind of going underground and becoming submerged and becoming covert. But it's making me think, two things actually. One, firstly, this submersion thing, the fact that, am I, or all of us, witnessing the transformation of a fairly conscious speech pattern in which we decide to speak in a certain way and end our sentences with an implied question or an actual question, and move from that to an actual speech pattern where we don't even, just a completely invisible, transparent way of speaking in which we don't even notice that we're ending our speeches with a question. It's just how we speak. The whole thing is just a covert, submerged metaphor. Is that what I'm witnessing? And secondly, why that speech pattern? Why do sentences which imply questions, whether they're overt or covert, end in this rising intonation? I'm not sure, I'm just speculating here, but my guess would be that it's something to do with metaphors of height. Because rising and falling intonation, there's already a metaphor there, rising and falling intonation. Why we call them rising and falling, I don't know. There's no one note is literally higher than another, but obviously we do put notes which are, there's no other way of saying it. We do put high notes at the top of the musical scale, and we do put low notes at the bottom, and we're completely familiar with that conceptualization. So it is about movement in space, and that movement in space is an upward inclination at the end. So it seems to me that the speaker is, at the end of their sentence, is doing this thing where they kind of look up at the end, or make an appeal upwards. So they're speaking on the same level as the person they're talking to, and then they kind of look up at them at the end, and there's an appeal in that direction. It seems to me there's something to do with deference, maybe, or dominance, or maybe submission in the kind of belief sense. I think I've spoken before about belief and submission being very close concepts, coming from the same etymological root, I believe. So maybe there's something about an appeal to that kind of submission, which isn't to do with power, it's to do with submission to authority, in the sense that the person you're addressing knows something that you don't know. So it becomes a request for information, even if it's just implied. So even if the question isn't actually a sentence at all, they're not actually asking a question. There's this implication that the person you're speaking to has authority in that, possession of knowledge sense, not in a political sense. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's complete crap. Yeah, that's all I've got to say on that, I think.